I'm Norberto Arrieta. I'm a developer in DSC. And you guys know Michael Greene?
Good morning. I'm Michael Greene. I'm the PM for DSC.
So we want to show you some of the work that we've been doing in DSC, in the LCM specifically. And yeah, just give you an idea of the direction that we're taking and take your questions.
Yeah. So some of you might have seen in January, I published a blog post in the PowerShell team blog about our plans for DSC. It was an update from last November. It's pretty detailed, so if there's anything that you'd like to share with whenever you get back home and you want to share with anybody, that's a good place to point them. It was a follow-up to that previous blog post from November where there was understandably some confusion about, okay, so if we're going to call this DSC Core, what does this mean, and things like that. And you'll see in this blog post, I purposefully just was referring to it as the new LCM. And those of you who've been using DSC, you understand what LCM is, Local Configuration Manager. I think since there's .NET Core and then PowerShell Core, then naturally, whenever people heard DSC Core, they thought, oh, well, then this is only going to work with PowerShell Core. And actually, what we're going to show today is what the new DSC engine looks like. It's very small, very robust, very quick to deploy and run. It's actually all written in C++, so it's not written in PowerShell Core. That'll be one of the myths that we'll dispel right away. But we do have a plan on how we can use resources that exist today and future resources written in other languages. I guess the only thing I wanted to talk about so I'm going to hand off to Norberto. He's going to walk you through. He's the developer for DSC. He's writing all of the code. He's a principal level developer, absolute rock star. So the best thing for a PM to do in this circumstance is just get out of the way and let you guys interact directly with the person developing the platform. After he's walked through the demo, then we'll go through some of the timelines to make this thing open source. So that is still our plan. I'm not going to make it open source today or anything like that, but I will talk about our timelines and what our expectations are at a pretty high level. So,
all right, thank you.
Hand off back to you.
High level, those are the points that I want to touch on. I'll go through each one of those with more detail. But what we've been working on in our team is making DSC cloud-friendly. We are focusing very much in cloud scenarios, and we are trying to address limitations that the current DSC has. As Michael already mentioned, we are focusing on making DSC very lightweight to deploy and to execute. We are adding support to run PS Code resources and native resources. Native meaning written in C or C++. We are moving away from the WMI, OMI protocols. We are going to use HTTP, REST over HTTP. We are making, today we have two source code bases, one for Windows and one for Linux. Although they originated from the same source code, they have diverged over the years. So we're trying to bring them together. So we will have one single DSC that can work on either Windows and Linux. We are planning on going open source, and everything that you see here, we are using in internal Azure scenarios. So we are making sure that the DSC that we are creating runs at scale, and it's easy to diagnose, and it's very performant. So let's go to the first point, lightweight LCM. The problem that we have today is that for you guys to get LCM, unless you are DSC, unless you are running 2016, you need WMF. So if you guys have used the Azure DSC extension, you can see that that is not very good, because if you want to use DSC to bootstrap your VM, you need to install the extension. The extension needs to go download WMF, install WMF, and then reboot the machine, which can take, in the best case scenarios, 5 minutes. If you are running 2008 R2, can take up to 20 minutes, because we need to go and install WMF4, .NET, and then WMF5. So that is just not acceptable for booting up bootstrapping a VM. VM should be able to bootstrap in questions of seconds or minutes. So now we have made DSC a very small package, a standalone, doesn't have any dependencies, or all the dependencies we can include in this package, and it's very easy to install. Over here, I'm using a 2012 R2 machine. It's blank. Only thing I did there is copy my demo. And this is the script that I'm going to use. Text is OK? Text is OK? All right. Cool. So I created a copy of this new package, put it in a zip file, and upload it to Azure Storage. So I'm going to download it. If you look at the progress, this package is about 60 megabytes, but that is because I'm bringing along PowerShell and .NET. DSC itself is well under 10 megabytes. It's very small. OK, so creating the file. If you didn't have these dependencies, for example, over here I'm bringing PowerShell Core. If you had already PowerShell Core in your machine, you don't need those dependencies, so it's just a quicker download. Over here, I need to bring those dependencies because it's a blank VM. There's nothing there. So anyway, now it's on my machine. I'm going to, it's a zip file. I'm going to uncompress it, also very fast. And then we created this new module, DSC install, to set up the DSC. So let's import that module and install it. First thing that we see is that now DSC is a standalone service. This is the output of get service. And it just runs by itself. Again, doesn't have any, you don't need to install anything else. Just download this package, start the service, and you're good to go. So that is the emphasis on the first part. The installation is very lightweight, very fast. Depending on your scenario, you can go from like as small as 10 megabytes to, I don't know, 60, 70, depending on what you need. The other thing that we did is some pieces of the LCM were written in C#. And there are some scenarios in Azure. For example, today we are using DSC in the Azure hosts themselves, not only on the Azure VMs, but also on the Azure hosts. And on those hosts, there's a requirement not to have dependencies on managed code. So now we have moved all the C# code. Now it's been rewritten in C++. That makes, again, DSC just self-contained, no dependencies. We remove the dependency on WMF, the dependency on .NET. Your workload may still have dependencies on .NET, but LCM itself doesn't. So now, and we are running as a service. Now let's talk about DSC resources. I'm going to use this very simple configuration. It's just running a script. It doesn't do anything useful. As part of that script, I'm outputting a verbose message with the PS version table. And nothing else. It's just to show you the what?
The whole script.
Yep. Oh, okay. Anyway, sorry. Yeah.
If you stop it, it might kill the downloading stuff. At least it'll stop executing after.
Okay, cool. Okay. Yeah. F8, not F5. There we go. So anyway, now I got a configuration. I'm producing a MOV file. There we go. As part of that download that we did, we have a new module with a new set of commandlets. New in the sense that we have to change the implementation, but we are trying to keep the same interface so that your current workloads have as small an impact as possible. But at the end of the day, it's an implementation of our commandlets. So now we run that configuration. I am so sorry. I tried this. Morning.
I don't think you ran LCM demo.
I didn't? Yeah. It's it created the MOF. I'm sorry? Did I import module? Oh, there it goes. Thank you. And as you can see, that guy is running, that script is running PS Core. So as Michael mentioned before, at the beginning there was some confusion. I mean, PowerShell is moving towards PS Core, and there was some confusion about what was happening with DSC. We are adding support for a new kind of resources. We will continue supporting Windows PowerShell resources, the resources that you use today. If you are using the Linux implementation, we will continue to support Python. But on top of that, we are adding support for PowerShell Core and for native resources. As a small parenthesis, we are dropping support for WMI resources, but we believe you guys are not affected. Initially, DSC was all built on top of WMI, the Windows Management Infrastructure. And we created one resource, the file resource, that is implemented using WMI. But we believe nobody other than us are doing WMI providers. So since we are moving away from WMI, we are dropping support for WMI providers. And we will rewrite a file in PowerShell itself, probably. Log is yeah, it's a very weird resource. It's implemented in LCM itself.
Okay.
Yep. So, yep. There's no actual module containing log. It's in the engine itself. So, with this, what we're trying to attempt is that since we're going cross-plat, this same guy is running on Windows and Linux, can run on Windows and Linux. And PS Core can do the same. This opens the door to writing new DSC resources using PS Core that would run both on Windows and Linux. Or, again, we have some scenarios where performance is critical, no dependencies on .NET. In that case, we open the possibility to write the DSC resources in C++ itself. So you could have an entire native platform, everything in C++, no external dependencies, very small, very performant. If you happen to need DSC for very performance scenarios. For example, we use it to perform inventory of resources in some of our Azure applications. And that needs to be run extremely fast. So we go for performance there, everything native. I forgot to tell you guys at the beginning that all of this is work in progress. Take it a little bit with a grain of salt. There may be changes, but the overall direction, it's what's important here. All of this, we are still working details. So the next thing is the REST API. So that command that I ran there in my script is actually just using invoke web requests to a local endpoint. The LCM is running in that endpoint using HTTPS and Windows Integrated Authentication. So the authentication part is transparent here. But now we receive external feedback that using DSC and try to integrate with DSC is hard because we use WMI as protocol and we use MOF as the representation of configurations. So slowly we are trying to get more open and go for a RESTful API with JSON. That would also facilitate, for example, writing Azure templates which are JSON. That would facilitate the authoring of DSC configurations because they could be inline in the Azure template itself. This is very early work. We have a long way to go before we can replace, not replace, because we will never drop support for MOF. We need to support to be backwards compatible, but have an alternate way to represent configurations using JSON. So anyway, once we are REST, that opens the possibility to new integration points. This is a very simplistic example again, but I don't know. Now, you could use the browser to query for meta configuration. You can see how earlier work is. Everything is badly formatted. But the meta configuration is there. So again, why are we doing this? We want to remove the dependency from WMI, OMI. Using WMI itself creates some problems because to use the full functionality of DSC, even if DSC itself didn't depend on WMF, WMI does. So that was part of the motivation. The other motivation is that on Linux, we have an open implementation of WMI. We have OMI. And OMI on Linux is not on parity with WMI on Windows. For example, if you have used DSC for Linux, there's no output from the resources. On Windows, you run a resource, and every verbose message shows what the resource is doing. And that doesn't happen on Linux. So we want to bring that on parity with Windows. And the third motivation was interoperability. Again, it's hard to use WMI because everything's SOAP. The big emphasis here is that although we are moving to a different protocol, to a different implementation, we are trying to keep as much backwards compatibility as possible. But there's some stuff that simply doesn't make sense in the new protocol. For example, all the parameter sets to use a sim session, those will have to change. No more sim sessions. I think we have a few parameters for the test computer, for the computer name. Those will also go away. Instead, we'll take a URI, an endpoint. And also emphasize that that REST service itself doesn't have any dependencies. We are not using IIS or Apache or anything else. It's self-contained. We are making a big effort to make this cross-platting. Again, today we have two different implementations. That is an engineering, creates engineering overhead because we need to maintain two different source codes. They have diverse. We need to, and the functionality of Linux is lagging behind Windows. So we want to support to resolve all those issues. We are focusing initially on Windows and Linux. We have had a few questions about support for Mac, but Mac is not in scope initially. But at least Windows and Linux we should have. So before we continue, I want to open to see if you guys have any questions. Again, this is the overall theme of the work that we've been doing. Make DSC self-contained, lightweight, open it using REST, and make it cross-plat. Those are the three big themes. Lightweight, fast, easy to install, cross-plat, and very performant. Yes.
With making DSC lightweight, we've all experienced the capabilities of it. How does that play against our security requirements? How would we address ensuring that only the correct administrators use the product that we develop? Or is that another subject?
No. Let me see if I understood correctly. Basically, what we are doing underneath is using Windows Integrated Authentication. So we know who's connecting to that endpoint. And we'll let you through only if you are an admin, which is the same as the current implementation. Yep. We are also considering using SSH on Linux. So over there, as long as you have a key, you would be able to connect. But yes, security is critical for this. DSC needs admin privileges for to do its work. And that service that I show you is running as local system. So we need to be very careful on the authentication part. And the other side of it is we need to be very careful on the authentication, trying to minimize the impact on the user experience. That is one of the motivations to use Windows Integrated Authentication. So you don't have to do an extra logon to that service. Windows will take care of it. Absolutely.
Does it work well with side-by-side with the existing LCM, with that Server 2016?
It's already side-by-side, but we still need to do some design. What happens if you have two different configurations side-by-side? Which one wins?
Command list, so like which one does it use?
Oh, yeah. You can tell the command. The endpoint is gone. But potentially, you just have the service listening in two ports, and the commandlet can switch to one or the other. But our thoughts are about one configuration tells you to do something with the system, and the other configuration tells you something different. Like in partial configurations, right? We have that conflict resolution, we call it. So that we need to still define for side-by-side. But today, it's already side-by-side, and one of our scenarios actually uses it. It's a restricted scenario, so we're not too worried about conflict resolution, but we still need to resolve that.
So it's a new REST endpoint, so you've got a new port that you're listening to that REST service on.
I'm sorry?
So you've got a new port
Yeah.
that you've got that REST service running on.
Yeah.
So in a lot of environments where you've got a lot of firewalls, the idea for access would be that you'd still come through your PS remoting session and then access that port from the local machine.
Since we don't want dependencies on PowerShell, we're thinking more SSH rather than remoting, yes. Our initial scenarios is localhost, so everything is happening internally. If we do HTTPS, 433 probably is already open on the firewall, and the other alternative is SSH.
So will there be any expectation that you'll need those ports opened, or it will come through SSH? So you'll be using those existing ports?
If we go HTTPS, then there would be an expectation that it's open. If not, SSH would do it. Yeah. We can probably support both. It's still a discussion inside the team where we go first.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, there was another question over here.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is kind of my understanding basically, but it seems like you guys have kind of done away with a bit of the Russian doll sort of layering of different protocols and tech stacks from the, the entry-level endpoint for LCM through the system and back out, right? So, are you using MI APIs at this point? Is that, or MI APIs being deprecated, or?
We are still using it, but that was never exposed to you guys, was it? I mean, internally we use it.
We looked at integrating using MI at one point, just to reduce some of the complexity with the layering. We're in Puppet. We implement, an integration with DSC, obviously.
I see.
So we had looked at it at one point, but it was kind of a bit of a lift to do the MI integration. But just wondering what the story is for that long term. Is that being completely deprecated and replaced with this?
MI, you mean WMI?
The management infrastructure APIs.
Yeah, we use.
MI.
Yeah, MI we use to connect with the resources. That would stay. Like for example, the C++ resources still go through MI.
Okay. Yeah, I saw one of your slides. There's the MI results still in the.
Yeah. I got you. I was thinking in the communication of the DSC commanded client to the DSC service, where we're talking about the communication of the engine with the resources. Yeah, no, that is not REST. That communication stays as it is today. So yeah, MI, we stay with MI.
And the other question I had was, I assume that this also would now remove the need for opening up HTTP endpoint for WinRM, which is a current requirement for.
Yeah. We wouldn't need WinRM anymore.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I hope that's good.
Yeah, definitely.
Since you mentioned SSH on Linux, I assume Kerberos would be supported if the Linux box is Kerberized.
Yeah.
And then if you do expose this.
Again, all of this is work in progress, no final decisions. Kerberos is in sight as well, but again, initially we are local only, then we want to open via Windows Integrated Authentication SSH. Kerberos is definitely in view. It'll be a staged approach. And there was another question over here.
A little bit off topic, but is the on-prem pull server being worked on like side by side with this at all, or is that?
Oh.
I'll take that one.
Yeah.
I'll stand in front of the firing squad. Oh, let me turn the volume back.
It's related to the side-by-side discussion.
I have a blog post, but I'll just go ahead and share it. So it's either going to go up today or tomorrow. So we have two things for a pull server. One is with this current branch release. So if you go out and register for Windows Server Insiders, I think it's build 17.623 is out there now. Combined with the latest, actually there's still pending merge of the XDSC web service resource, then we will have full support for SQL Server as the backend database behind pull server. So that opens up a couple of scenarios. You can do high availability. I've tested 3 front-end pull servers pointing against a single instance of SQL, and it just needs a SQL instance. It doesn't care if it's one box or clustered or whatever. It just needs to see a SQL instance. It's just a connection string. And really, it's one file difference and a web.config difference, really, to make that work. After that, so we kind of feel like, so obviously the direction's Azure Automation and community, right, and open source everything. So once we have SQL support on the back end, I don't know yet what our performance numbers are in terms of how many nodes, we'll support for that. But that's what I want to announce in the blog post is we don't have plans for future features and capabilities to be added to Windows Pull Server. Now it's on a 10-year support cycle, and it'll still be in the next couple of releases of Windows, because that's the way Windows Server works. You can't just pull something back out. So it's not going anywhere. It'll still be supported. So in isolated environments, you have the existing pull server, you have push mode combined with pull server. If you wanted to do away with, usually the big issue is certificate management. So if you wanted to use push so that certificate management was a little bit simplified and still use pull server for reporting, which I think will be the big deal with SQL, because you get the advantage of the entire SQL ecosystem of reporting tools. And for module delivery, and that would still make sense. And then, of course, there's Tug, which I think is the biggest open source project around. We fully documented the protocol. So Tug is a good option if you want to contribute to a project and kind of take pull server in your own direction. There's also Trek, which is a Node.js implementation, but honestly, it's super, super early, and we just haven't found the right people to get behind that yet. And then there are some MVPs, I think this would be really cool, who are interested in creating a GitHub repo focused on extending Windows Pull Server. So the idea would be like Ben Gallens has created like a wrapper for Windows Pull Server that handles certificate management and things like that. So he's interested in creating a GitHub repo that just say, hey, here's a bunch of community tools that bring Pull Server closer in line with things that are happening in Azure. But that'll be completely community driven, and I'd be happy to be a contributor, but I'll probably let somebody else be a maintainer. So yeah, that'll probably get published either tomorrow or Friday for Pull Server. So if you feel strongly about that, I'm happy to take the bullets and have a conversation with you. It's just our direction is to put all of our, as many hours as possible into moving fast in Azure Automation. So, yes, ma'am.
Are there still plans to make the LCM multi-threaded?
Multi-thread, as in...
So I know what you're talking about. To have configurations run, to be able to say you want us to run serially or to allow parallel execution of resources.
That discussion happened as recently as 2 days ago. And one problem that we have with that is that in the current implementation of the LCM, we have a lot of global variables. So we need to refactor that code or consider running the 2 configurations out of process in their own processes so that the global state doesn't mess each other. And then we have the issues that the resources themselves may be tripping into each other. So for now, we're staying sequential execution until we can have a better story around out-of-process execution and what happens when resources, or what can we do with resources that conflict between each other.
What does the module development look like for these new languages?
Yep. We are going to invest in the resource kit, of course, make it Core compatible, and probably we will rely on the community as well. We do have native resources, but they are so internal to the Azure scenarios, I doubt that would be of any use outside
So say you
our team.
develop like a Python one with the expectation with the new system that you could use that Python one against a system that, so the Python right now works for Linux.
Right.
Could you write a Python resource that works against Windows?
We are going that path. There's nothing preventing us from doing it, I believe. It's just going to be a question of prioritization because the testing effort would, it has some impact on, we need to create testing infrastructure and so on. But yes, if we have a common source code and cross-plat, there should, nothing should prevent us from executing PS Code on Linux or Python on Windows. Eventually, there was talk about creating an open provider model where you could come up with your own provider for whatever language, but that's way in the future.
Yeah, and I want to make sure it's really clear for resources. By going with that provider model, it means we have that provider for Windows PowerShell, PowerShell Core, Python, C++. The Windows PowerShell provider means, I checked this morning, there's 1,218 DSC resources in the gallery right now. That means, although we'll have to test all 1,218 of them, but the goal is they just keep working because they're running in Windows PowerShell, and this version of DSC can just execute in that context. And then for PowerShell Core, it has this really nifty built-in variable set of is Windows, is Linux, is OS X, so, or is Mac OS. So that means when we sit down to construct resources that are designed to be cross-platform, PowerShell actually knows where it's running. So we can just do conditionals inside those resources and say, if you're in Windows, then is Windows equals true, then do this. And if you're is Linux equals true, then do this. So those will be really cool resources to create.
Yeah.
And we'll just do it the same way we have been. I think probably, we haven't settled. I think what we should do is sit down in the community calls and just talk through, like, do we want to provide updates to the existing resources? Do we want to create new resources? You may have seen, I'm a big fan of getting rid of the X and just having an expression of quality, and then have in your README file, you express whether or not it's supported and where support comes from. I think it's a much better model. So I think we just keep moving that direction, right? And we just do things like, if we want to rewrite certificate DSC or something, then right now it's X certificate. That might be a good time if we go through that name change to implement cross-plat or something like that. That'd be an interesting one. Yep,
If
sure.
I may, so with the JSON, with the LCM with hitting against the rest, you don't have to compile that file. You just hit the rest with the code, which kind of mimics what Invoked DSC resource does. But so do you still have to have that one document, or can you have? I assume you can have several different snippets of JSON, and then you would just recall against the API. So like right now you have a moth that has your entire server config. You could split it to parcels if you wanted, but then that runs all at once. What if you wanted separate? Basically to mimic a partial. You could do that with JSON, right? You just have to call the API several times.
Well, the JSON would be just an alternative to express the same thing as in MOV. So whatever you could do in MOV today, you could do with JSON when we do the implementation. As far as executing different pieces.
Well, you wouldn't really need to at that point, because then it would just be.
Yeah,
you basically strip out the process of having to compile and distribute a file.
Oh, right.
So
yeah.
I think that's awesome. I just want to bring that up.
And again, if we go JSON, for those of you who use Azure templates, the idea is to write inline your configuration, no need for compilation. Yeah.
You would just have a property under your extension. You would just have your configuration right there native.
Maybe. Theoretically, that would be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the goal, right? Head that direction. Cool. There's a couple things I wanted to touch on before we close up, and we can keep questions open. I just wanted to make sure. I should mention, the only thing we didn't touch on, so we're still continuing on with Invoked DSC resource. So as we move forward, the partnerships we've had with Puppet and Chef and others is just as important as it's always been. So if you're using the community resources together with Puppet, Chef, Ansible, whatever your choice is of configuration tools outside of DSC, that's just as important as ever. We want to keep that going. And I meet frequently with people from all of those companies. So as far as taking it open source, I want to go through this in phases. It's super important to me that we don't just take this code base, put it in GitHub and then be like, yay, we're open source, and then like close the door, right? That would be awful. So I really want to take a fairly conservative approach to make sure that the day the code is checked in, the team is ready to respond as you guys file issues and pull requests and things like that, and that the proper test automation has been written so that if you submit a pull request, you get meaningful feedback so that you can interact in a self-service way through that process and not just get random comments back. So what I want to do, honestly, I was hoping I could get this done by this week. I didn't, but it'll be github.com/Microsoft/DSC is where it will end up. Within the next few weeks or so, what I want to do is make that a public repo and collaborate with the community on the staging of the repo. So we're going to take the docs from the PowerShell project around documenting the product, providing guidance, providing style guide, providing a process that you can expect to follow on how to submit quality issues and submit pull requests that are as interactive as possible. So we want to get all of that stuff staged, and we'll just leave a source directory empty for now. And then sometime this summer, I don't want to get aggressive about setting dates, then we'll celebrate a code check-in. That will be probably something like an alpha. And then we'll just keep working together. So we'll get through a process of declaring beta. This is again a soft thing, but I would hope to say by the time we hit beta, that would be a signal that we can start testing resources with this. Obviously, people are going to start testing resources against alpha too. So, but I would like to hit a code quality point where we get to beta and say, yeah, we're seeing good numbers around what's working around community resources, so we've got a good beta, and we can start narrowing focus and work towards a release candidate and then a general availability. I definitely can't put dates. It's not that I don't want to, it's that it would be irresponsible for me to put a hard calendar date on a general availability. But once we hit open source and we're working together on this, then that's where the README comes in, and we just keep having like the monthly call and working together and setting that. It would be great if we can get this done by the end of the calendar year, but I don't want to say that we will, because who knows what could come our way 2 months from now. But that's what we're thinking is get this thing open source as soon as possible, and then it's transparent and you can see progress and you can see what's happening and work together with us. So that's super important. Anything you'd like to add on that? No. Okay. I did want to point out, so this code base, as far as the quality is concerned and what we've seen so far, so obviously, we're very happy to be using DSC throughout Azure, and everybody assumes that means, oh yeah, Azure Automation DSC, right? That's where, and DSC extension, that's where we're using DSC. The last year, you guys haven't really seen too much in the way of updates to LCM and like new features in DSC. Actually, I do want to make on that point before I go to the Azure stuff. I'm taking everything from user voice, that's a request for DSC, and I'll be staging those as issues in the new repo so that they don't get lost and so they're surfaced there so people know what to contribute to. And if you feel like the top of the list is things like maintenance windows and running in parallelization and things like that. Like none of those requests that you've submitted previously are getting lost. They're all getting brought forward. So as we've had this progress of developing this in Azure, what you haven't seen is that this DSC engine is actually the code behind update management, change in inventory. It's being used in other places in Azure Security Center and OMS. So what's interesting about this, get, set, test. Get was the first method to get implemented. So there's some additional capabilities there, but effectively throughout these other tools, whenever they need to get information about what's going on inside that machine, they're just using this DSC code base and calling get with some additional capabilities to go do that. That's why he keeps mentioning C++ as a provider, because that allows us to go write C++ resources for inside of Azure that very small, very fast, that kind of thing, and I can hold to that. So anyway, we saw the scale go like crazy. So for Azure Automation, we've got these like tens and tens of thousands of nodes, and then you go to things like update management, very popular to patch servers, hundreds of thousands of nodes, and then it goes to Azure Security Center, which is super popular, millions of nodes, and this has not been an area where we've had major incidents coming our way, which is super important to the team. If we're responding to supporting a piece of software, it means that limits the hours we can put towards building new features. The nice thing about the code that he's written, really haven't had support issues coming in around this. So it's not only holding true to the size and speed that he's been looking for, the code quality is just out of this world. So I mentioned on day one and during the keynote that I like that model that Kubernetes has followed, where Google builds Kubernetes as their container platform. They make it very reliable and really good quality, and then they open source it and work with the community, and then the community sees the benefits of that big commercial investment in cloud scale. That's what I'm hoping to see for DSC. So the reason I'm bringing this slide up is to say, like, there's work going on to make this work really well in in Azure, and making that quality first class is very important. And as we take this project open source, you get to see the benefits of that, in addition to working with you to bring in the features, and hopefully by working with the community, we'll even see features that we're not able to get to as an engineering team. So I'm really looking forward to watching this process come together. And we didn't need that slide. Let's open the floor back up for questions. I think we've got at least a few more minutes. Yeah, we have literally 1 more minute. So. Any other questions? If not, feel free to pull us aside anytime.